In 2025, something cracked. Not with riots, not with a market crash, not with any single dramatic event that makes the front page and stays there for a week. It cracked with silence. Across the wealthiest nation on earth, millions of people are now living in conditions that the country once declared it would erase. Families who owned homes are rationing food. People with full-time jobs are sleeping in cars, parked beside luxury towers glowing half-empty through the night. The promise that hard work guarantees survival, the foundational promise of American life, has quietly expired for a significant portion of the population. The numbers make the shape of this visible. More than 650,000 Americans sleep without shelter each night. 11 million homes sit empty across the country, held by investors and corporations waiting for prices to rise. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has reached $1,870. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And yet the word that would accurately describe this moment is one that economists actively avoid: depression, not a recession. Not a correction, not a rough patch. A depression quiet, algorithmic, and disguised so thoroughly as normal life that most people experiencing it assume they are the problem. This is part of our Collapse series. Here is what is actually happening. Part 1. The housing capture. The standard explanation for what is happening with housing in the United States is that there is a shortage. Not enough homes being built. Insufficient supply meeting overwhelming demand. That explanation is incomplete in a way that matters. The United States builds enough housing units every year to shelter its population many times over. The problem is not supply. The problem is who those homes are built for and who controls the ones that already exist. Tonight, more than 650,000 Americans will sleep without shelter in tents, in cars, in RVs, lined along warehouse parking lots. Simultaneously, 11 million homes across the country sit vacant, held by hedge funds, private equity firms, and institutional investors who are deliberately keeping them off the market to maintain upward pressure on prices. That is not misfortune. That is a deliberate financial strategy. Every vacant home is a managed asset. Every family unable to afford rent is, from that perspective, a market condition being optimized. The numbers at the renter level confirm how completely the math has broken down. The average one-bedroom apartment now rents for $1,870 per month. To qualify, landlords typically require proof of income at roughly 3.5 times the rent, approximately $65,000 per year, plus upfront deposits and fees that can total close to $7,000 before a single month of occupancy begins. For the 78% of American workers living paycheck to paycheck, that threshold is not a financial hurdle. It is a wall. Families earning $50,000 per year are spending more than half of their income just to stay indoors. One missed paycheck, one hospital visit, one unexpected car repair, and the floor gives out. For buyers, the picture is no better. The median home price has surpassed $420,000. The median household income sits around $70,000. To purchase that median home, the typical household would need to commit 6 full years of pre-tax income before food, before transportation, before any other expense just for the purchase price. With mortgage rates near 7.2%, a household would need to earn approximately $110,000 per year to qualify for a standard home loan. Only 12% of renters will ever reach that threshold. For the rest, homeownership has become something their parents could do, and they cannot, not because of choices they made, but because the system that governed their parents' era no longer exists. Part 2. Healthcare is a debt sentence. When housing captures the largest share of a household's income, everything else has to fit into what remains. And what waits in that remaining space unpredictable, unavoidable, and often catastrophic is healthcare. An average emergency room visit in the United States now costs $2,900. In Thailand, the same visit costs approximately $6. In Mexico, $12. A vial of insulin that costs $8 abroad costs $140 in the United States. These are not anomalies. They are the standard pricing structure of a healthcare system that has been progressively transformed from a medical institution into a financial one. Over 530,000 American families file for bankruptcy every year, specifically because someone in the household got sick. That is more than the entire population of Wyoming erased financially, annually, by medical bills. Private equity firms now own more than 40% of emergency clinics across the country. The pattern following acquisition is consistent. Prices rise 30 to 70% within the first year. Insurance deductibles have tripled over the past decade, now averaging $2,800 per person per year. A 3-day hospital stay can generate a bill of $80,000, and the patient, even with insurance, still negotiates that number like a hostage. For the working and middle class, this creates a specific and deeply rational response: delay. You think about whether you can afford to miss a day of work before you think about whether the symptom requires attention. You split pills because the full prescription is too expensive. You skip checkups because the copay competes with the electric bill. You wait until something becomes impossible to ignore, which means you wait until something minor has become something serious, at which point the cost has multiplied and the outcome is worse. The system profits most from this pattern. Prolonged illness generates prolonged billing. The longer someone stays sick, the more the system extracts. Illness is not a tragedy from the perspective of the balance sheet. It is a revenue stream. Part 3. The rural abandonment. The response to unaffordable cities has always carried an implicit suggestion. Move somewhere cheaper, somewhere quieter, somewhere with space and lower costs and a slower pace. In 2025, cheap has become another word for abandoned. Across the interior of America, the Midwest, Appalachia, the Great Plains towns that once held communities together now echo like shells. Main streets filled with shuttered storefronts, schools converted to storage, hospitals replaced by boarded windows. Since 2020, more than 70 rural hospitals have closed permanently. Another 600 stand on the financial edge of closure. In many counties across these regions, poverty rates exceed 25%. Household incomes, adjusted for inflation, have fallen back to levels not seen since the 1960s. Water infrastructure fails. Bridges deteriorate. Roads erode. Broadband access, the basic requirement for participation in the modern economy, remains absent across stretches of the country that span hundreds of miles. Entire regions have been effectively disconnected from the digital economy that the rest of the country now depends on for employment, commerce, and basic services. You can buy a house in these towns for $80,000. The only available local job pays $14 an hour. You can own the land, but the future is not included. In many of these counties, the distance to the nearest functioning emergency room exceeds an hour of driving. That hour, in the wrong medical situation, is the difference between survival and death. There are no ambulances deployed nearby. There are no specialists within reach. There is the highway, the dark fields on either side of it, and the understanding that no one is coming quickly enough to matter. This is how a country fractures without declaring war on itself. Not with explosions, with erosion. And the erosion has been underway for long enough that for many communities, what remains no longer resembles what was there before. Part 4. Working into the ground. The official unemployment rate in 2025 sits at 3.9%. That number is accurate as far as it goes. It does not go very far. What it does not capture is 9 million Americans holding 2 or more jobs simultaneously. It does not reflect average work weeks quietly extending past 50 hours across multiple employment categories. It does not account for the fact that real wages, adjusted for inflation, have not meaningfully increased in 2 decades, while corporate profits have reached $2.8 trillion, the highest level in recorded history. The harder the workforce produces, the more concentrated the return becomes at the top of the system. That is not a market failure. That is the market functioning as designed. Nurses work overnight clinical shifts and then drive rideshare before dawn to cover insurance deductibles. Teachers grade papers and then tutor online for 3 hours to afford the rent increase that arrived without warning. Engineers freelance on weekends not to build something new, but to cover the gap between their salary and the actual cost of living in the city where their employer is located. Work has not disappeared. It has multiplied, fragmented, and colonized every available hour. The 4-0-hour work week, a hard-won standard that represented a century of labor organizing, has dissolved into a permanent hustle in which the phone never stops and rest is coded as laziness. Automation and artificial intelligence have accelerated the redefinition of labor from a source of human dignity to a line-item cost to be minimized. Professional workers, nurses, teachers, analysts, designers are discovering that the insecurity previously associated with low-wage work is now extending upward into their categories. They are employed, they are productive, they are replaceable, and they know it. The gig economy formalized this arrangement with language that reframes exploitation as flexibility. No benefits, no safety net, no guaranteed hours. App notifications functioning as a digital management layer, workers competing against algorithms for access to shifts, for customer ratings that determine future income, for the permission, renewed daily, to continue earning. This is not the frontier of innovation. It is industrialized precarity wearing the branding of opportunity. Part 5. The generation that opted out. Every generation is handed the same foundational story. Study hard, work harder, and the system will reward your effort with a stable life. For young Americans in 2025, that story has become something they recognize as fiction, not cynically, but empirically. They have watched it fail in front of them, in their own lives, and in the lives of the people around them. They enter adulthood carrying an average of $39,000 in student loan debt. They rent apartments that consume 45% of their income. They have watched home prices climb more than 40% since 2020, while their wages have moved a fraction of that distance in the same period. Millennials and Generation Z together hold approximately 6% of national wealth. At the equivalent point in their life cycle, baby boomers held 21%. The gap is not explained by discipline or financial literacy. It is explained by the structural conditions, housing costs, debt loads, wage stagnation, and asset price inflation that defined each generation's economic environment when they were trying to begin. Surveys now show that 58% of Americans under 30 believe capitalism does more harm than good. That figure is not an ideological position adopted from a political movement. It is a conclusion reached through lived experience, through watching parents lose homes, through watching peers skip meals, through watching compound interest on student loans consume a decade of income. The behavioral response is rational and visible in the data. Marriage rates declining, birth rates declining, homeownership rates among young adults at historic lows. Even participation in elections falling not from apathy, but from a calculated assessment that institutional participation in a system perceived as structurally closed offers diminishing returns. They are refusing, quietly and without drama, to continue performing investment in a set of arrangements that have not produced the outcomes they were promised. A civilization does not begin its terminal decline when its young rebel against it. It begins when they stop believing a future worth building exists within it. That transition is already underway. Part 6. The working homeless. There was a time when homelessness and joblessness were understood as the same condition. You were without shelter because you were without income. That connection has broken. In 2025, work no longer guarantees a roof. An estimated 2 million Americans are currently living in cars, RVs, storage units, or informal shelters while holding active employment. Delivery drivers sleeping in the parking lots where they complete their routes. Warehouse workers showering in public restrooms between shifts. Medical assistants napping in their cars before pre-dawn shifts begin, uniforms folded in the passenger seat. Since 2020, the average rent for a studio apartment has increased 29%. Real wages over the same period have fallen approximately 3% when adjusted for inflation. In dozens of metropolitan areas, earning $25 an hour, a wage that would have been considered adequate not many years ago, no longer qualifies a worker for a modest one-bedroom apartment. A single rent increase of $400 per month can eliminate a family's financial stability in the space of one lease renewal cycle. And while that family loses their housing, 11 million residential units across the country remain deliberately vacant, held by institutional investors as financial instruments. Their emptiness, a managed condition rather than an oversight. This is the housing paradox of the current moment. Abundance producing homelessness, vacancy constituting profit, and a growing class of citizens who are simultaneously employed and unhoused. The existence of the working homeless is not a failure of individual responsibility. It is the predictable output of a system in which shelter has been reclassified as an investment asset rather than a basic social necessity. When housing becomes a financial instrument, the people who need it for survival are competing against entities for whom its occupancy is irrelevant to its value. In that competition, the outcome is not random. It is structural. Part 7. The blame machine. For a system that produces these outcomes at scale to remain intact, it requires a specific kind of ideological maintenance. People experiencing poverty must be persuaded that their poverty is the result of personal failure. People losing housing must understand themselves as irresponsible. People unable to afford healthcare must believe they have made poor financial decisions. This is not accidental. It is the most efficient form of social control available, more durable than law enforcement, less expensive than reform, and self-sustaining once embedded in culture. The mechanics are visible once identified. Corporate media covers inflation as a consumer behavior problem, offering budgeting advice and spending tips, while the same corporations announcing record profits run advertisements in the adjacent slot. Housing shortages are framed as a supply and demand imbalance, obscuring the role of institutional landlords in deliberately restricting that supply. Government poverty metrics still rely on formulas developed in the 1960s that exclude modern cost categories, childcare, student debt, healthcare premiums, systematically undercounting the population experiencing genuine financial hardship. The unemployment rate excludes millions who have stopped actively searching. By design, the official numbers produce a picture of the economy that diverges significantly from the one most people are living inside. Social media completes the architecture. Algorithmic feeds that surface aspirational content, luxury lifestyles, financial success, visible abundance, create a reference environment in which struggle appears to be the exception rather than the rule. If 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, but the content environment presents financial comfort as normal, the 78% draw an individual conclusion rather than a collective one. They believe they are failing in a system that is working. The system is working, just not for them. That distinction, and the guilt that fills the gap between the two, is the mechanism that keeps the arrangement stable. Because as long as the people bearing the cost believe they are responsible for it, the people designing and maintaining the system remain invisible and unaccountable. Conclusion. The aggregate picture assembled from these pieces is not ambiguous. Household debt in the United States has surpassed $17.5 trillion, the highest level in history. Corporate profits hold at $2.8 trillion. The top 1% controls more than 32% of national wealth. The bottom half of the population owns approximately 2.5%. 44 million Americans experience food insecurity. Cities cannot maintain basic infrastructure. Families work 60, 70, 80 hours a week and cannot afford the stability that 40 hours once provided. These are not the indicators of a system under temporary stress. They are the indicators of a system that has reached its structural endpoint. History offers a consistent pattern for this stage. The Roman Empire did not fall from external conquest. It collapsed from internal decay that had been accumulating for generations, while its institutions maintained the appearance of stability. The French aristocracy ignored the mathematics of famine until the streets made the calculation impossible to avoid. The Soviet Union did not fail militarily. It failed when the gap between official reality and lived experience became too wide for belief to bridge. Empires do not die of war. They die of the distance between what they claim to be and what they actually are, sustained past the point where the population can continue pretending the gap does not exist. The United States is at that threshold. Not past it, but at it. And the threshold is visible not in a single dramatic event, but in the accumulated weight of small decisions made daily by millions of people. The nurse picking up the rideshare shift, the family choosing between the prescription and the electric bill, the young adult calculating whether participation in the system offers any return worth the investment. When enough of those individual calculations arrive at the same conclusion, the silence that has held the illusion together ends. The question this video leaves you with is not whether the numbers are real. They are. The question is what you do with the knowledge of them. Because awareness, held clearly and shared honestly, is where every change in history has started.